This is the story of a god, a mighty, muscular, lightning-hurling god who just couldn't keep it in his pants. Or robe, I should say. This is the story of Zeus, the sky father of Mount Olympus, husband to Hera, father to, well, everyone. Because whenever Zeus got bored, he didn't write poetry. He shape-shifted to seduce, into a bull, a swan, a golden rain cloud. And that is how half of Greek mythology was born. This is the story of divine drama, mythological consequences, and one thunder god's very busy love life. So let's find out why Zeus really couldn't keep his lightning bolt in his robe. Part 1. Before we begin, please comment where you are and what time it is so we can see who's joining us from around the world. We love to see where you are tuning in from. Now close your eyes, sink into the covers, take a deep breath and release it, relaxing your face, shoulders, and the rest of your body. Let your thoughts slow, and let this very old tale carry you gently into slumber. In the beginning, when the world was young, and the Titans still ruled from their golden thrones, there lived a goddess named Metis. Daughter of the ancient Titans Oceanus and Tethys, she possessed wisdom so profound it was said she knew all that was, all that is, and all that would ever be. Her name meant wisdom and cunning, though too smart for her own good might have been more accurate given what was coming. Metis wasn't just wise, she was crucial to the rise of the Olympians themselves. When Zeus was plotting to overthrow his father Kronos, it was Metis who devised the plan that would free his siblings. She created the potion that made Kronos disgorge Zeus's brothers and sisters, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Nothing says family reunion quite like being vomited out of your father's stomach. Fresh from his victory in the Titanomachy, Zeus was riding high, king of the gods, master of thunder, and apparently thinking he was quite the catch. When he spotted Metis, he was genuinely intrigued. Here was someone who could match his intellect, challenge his thinking, and actually hold a conversation that didn't involve weather patterns or lightning bolt trajectories. But Metis, being wise enough to smell trouble from several mountaintops away, had no interest in becoming a notch on Zeus's proverbial belt. When he began pursuing her, she employed every shape-shifting trick in the book. Their chase became legendary. She turned into a hawk, he became an eagle, she transformed into a fish, he followed as a dolphin, she became a serpent, he became a bigger serpent. Subtlety was never Zeus's strong suit. Finally, either impressed by his persistence or simply tired of the divine game of tag, Metis allowed herself to be caught. Their union was genuine, born of mutual respect and attraction. For a time, they were actually happy. Shocking, I know. When Metis became pregnant, Zeus was overjoyed, blissfully unaware that the fates were about to throw him the mother of all curveballs. Through the whispers of Gaia, who, let's be honest, never met a dramatic prophecy she didn't like to share, Zeus learned that Metis would bear 2 children. The first, a daughter, would equal Zeus in strength and wisdom, which was concerning enough. But the second child, a son, would be powerful enough to overthrow Zeus, just as Zeus had overthrown Kronos. Because apparently, divine father-son relationships were destined to be complicated. The prophecy hit Zeus like a cold shower of reality. He genuinely loved Metis, which made what happened next even worse. As he brooded over his options, memories of his own childhood haunted him. Hiding from Kronos, watching his father devour his siblings, the weight of destiny on his young shoulders. Was this how it would always be? An endless cycle of fathers and sons playing the most extreme version of King of the Mountain imaginable. Zeus did what Zeus did best. He came up with a plan. Not a good plan, mind you, but a plan nonetheless. He approached Metis with honeyed words and clever challenges, probably feeling like the worst husband in existence, a title he would somehow manage to surpass multiple times in the future. He turned their shape-shifting into a game, challenging her to become something tiny, like a drop of water. Metis, who despite being the goddess of wisdom apparently didn't see this obvious trap coming, agreed. And then Zeus did the unthinkable. He swallowed her whole. Yes, like father, like son, though at least Zeus had the decency to wait until his wife was conveniently bite-sized. By consuming her, he thought he'd solved the problem while also conveniently absorbing her wisdom. 2 birds, 1 stone, right? Oh, how wrong he was. Because Meti, ever the overachiever, decided that being swallowed wasn't going to stop her from being a devoted mother. Inside Zeus's head, she began crafting armour and weapons for her unborn daughter. Picture, if you will, the king of the gods trying to maintain his dignified appearance while essentially housing a divine blacksmith workshop in his skull. The constant hammering gave Zeus headaches that would make Atlas's burden look like a minor inconvenience. The headaches grew worse with each passing day. Zeus would storm around Olympus, sometimes literally. Weather patterns tended to match his moods, clutching his head and making the kind of dramatic declarations only a god with a splitting headache could make. Thunder rolled continuously across the heavens, and the other gods started taking bets on how long before something had to give. Finally, driven to desperation, Zeus summoned Hephaestus, the divine craftsman. The forge god brought his sharpest bronze axe, though he must have had some reservations about being asked to split open the skull of the king of gods. It's not exactly the kind of request that comes up in your average day of divine craftsmanship. The moment Hephaestus's axe struck true, the crack that followed echoed through all creation. The sky split, the earth shook, and from Zeus's forehead burst forth Athena, fully grown, fully armed, and probably wondering why her birth certificate would read Delivery Room Father's Skull. She emerged with spear raised and shield ready, her war cry shaking the pillars of Olympus itself. The goddess of strategic warfare and wisdom had arrived, born not from a womb but from thought itself, which given her future as the smartest of the Olympians was rather on brand. The marble halls of Olympus still echoed with whispers about Metis when Zeus first laid eyes on Themis. The air was thick with the lingering scent of ozone from his recent headache-induced storms, and perhaps that should have been enough to make him pause. But there she stood at the edge of the celestial gardens, her scales of justice catching the golden light of ambrosia-tinged clouds, her presence as grounding as the earth itself. Themis was different from Metis in every way that mattered. Where Metis had been all quick wit and cunning, Themis embodied divine law and order itself. Her voice carried the weight of mountains when she spoke of justice, each word measured and purposeful like the balanced scales she carried. The folds of her white chiton whispered against the marble floors as she walked, steady and deliberate as the passage of time itself. The subtle fragrance of mountain laurel followed her, mixing with the eternal spring breeze of Olympus. Even the Horai, the seasons themselves, seemed to slow their eternal dance when she passed, as if paying respect to their future mother, though they didn't know it yet. Zeus found himself drawn to her not with the burning passion that had marked his pursuit of Metis, but with something deeper. Every time thunder rolled across the skies, she didn't flinch like the others. Instead, she would lift those knowing eyes to the heavens, one eyebrow slightly raised as if to say, "Really, Lord of the Sky, is that necessary?" Their courtship was remarkably proper by Zeus's standards, which admittedly isn't saying much. No shape-shifting, no chases, no trickery. The other gods nearly died of shock. The very fabric of order in the cosmos seemed to approve. Flowers bloomed brighter in her wake, and the stars aligned themselves more precisely in their dance across the night sky. Their union produced the Horai, the hours and seasons, and the Moirai, the fates themselves. Yes, Zeus managed to father the very beings who would go on to weave, measure, and cut the threads of destiny. If he thought this might give him some sort of advantage in avoiding future prophecies, he was sorely mistaken. The Fates, it turned out, didn't believe in family discounts. Their parting was perhaps the most civilized breakup in all of mythology, which admittedly isn't saying much in a pantheon where romantic disputes usually ended in transformations or natural disasters. The end of their union was as ordered and measured as Themis herself. There were no dramatic scenes, no hurled lightning bolts, no divine tantrums. Those would come later, and frequently, during his marriage to Hera. Instead, it was more like a carefully negotiated peace treaty, rather fitting considering Themis's role as the goddess of divine law and order. The halls of Olympus fell unusually quiet the day they parted. Even the eternal flames in the braziers seemed to burn more solemnly. Themis, her scales perfectly balanced as always, simply stated that their time together had served its purpose. Their children, the Horae, Seasons, and the Moirai, Fates, were born. Destiny had been fulfilled, and the natural order demanded change. Zeus, perhaps still benefiting from Metis's wisdom swirling in his skull, actually listened. It might have been the last time in history he handled a breakup with anything approaching maturity. Or maybe he just knew better than to argue with the embodiment of divine law, especially when said embodiment had given birth to the very fates who controlled destiny itself. Their parting ceremony, because of course Themis would insist on proper procedure, was witnessed by the stars themselves. She returned to her duties as the voice of divine law, taking her place as one of Zeus's most trusted advisors, a role that would occasionally prove awkward during his future romantic entanglements. After all, nothing quite matches the discomfort of having your ex-lover be the one pointing out the cosmic impropriety of your latest affair. Themis would continue to appear at Zeus's court, dispensing justice and order with the same unwavering dedication she'd always shown. Their children would go about their duties, the Horae maintaining the rhythm of seasons and social order, while the Moirai wove, measured, and cut the threads of fate with their mother's precise attention to detail and their father's unshakable determination. And if sometimes Zeus's thunder rumbled a bit more softly when Themis delivered her judgments, or if she occasionally raised an eyebrow at his more impulsive decisions, well, that was simply the natural order of things. The summer air still hummed with the quiet strength of Themis's justice when Zeus first noticed Eurynome dancing through the clouds. The graceful oceanid moved like flowing water itself, her steps creating patterns in the very air around her, leaving traces of sea spray shimmer in her wake. Each movement rippled through the ether like waves catching moonlight, demanding attention without asking for it. The very clouds seemed to part to watch her dance, and even the winds held their breath. Perhaps it was the lingering effects of Metis's wisdom in his skull that made Zeus pause to consider why he couldn't seem to settle into contentment. The answer echoed in his mind like distant thunder. Power, vast and terrible, breeds a specific kind of loneliness. When you rule the sky itself, when your smallest decisions affect the fate of the world, when your family gatherings can trigger natural disasters, well, it does something to a god. Some would later theorize that Zeus's wandering eye was inevitable. After all, how does one expect the sky itself to remain contained? The thunder god carried within him the very essence of storm and change, as unpredictable as lightning and as restless as wind. He was the force that drove clouds across continents, that sparked life-giving rain and devastating tempests alike. Asking him to be constant was like asking the seasons to pause their eternal dance, though as many would point out, quietly and far from Olympus, this explanation sounded suspiciously convenient for someone who couldn't keep his chiton fastened. Eurynome, though, Eurynome was different, or at least that's what Zeus told himself, just as he had with Metis and Themis. But watching her dance, even the most cynical observer might have believed him. Her movements reminded Zeus of the way clouds shaped themselves across his domain, the way waves danced beneath his storms. Each step wrote poetry in the air, each gesture painted stories in the wind. The gentle sound of her bare feet against the marble floors of Olympus created music that even the muses stopped to admire, their own instruments falling silent in appreciation. Her laughter carried the melody of mountain streams, clear and bright as spring water tumbling over ancient stones. Her eyes held the depth of her father Oceanus's waters, sometimes storm-dark and mysterious, other times clear as Mediterranean shallows. When she moved through the halls of Olympus, flowers would turn to follow her passage, as if she carried within her the very essence of grace that nature itself longed to emulate. The air around her always smelled of salt breeze and fresh rain, with undertones of sun-warmed stone and wild herbs that grew on seaside cliffs. It was a scent that made Zeus's lightning spark unbidden in the skies above, creating impromptu light shows that mortals below would write poems about for generations. Other gods would later swear they could hear thunder rumbling contentedly whenever she danced, like a massive celestial cat purring. The mighty lord of the sky, reduced to creating atmospheric special effects like some divine lighting designer. The fates must have been laughing themselves silly. Their courtship was a study in motion, a divine dance that would inspire artists and poets for millennia to come. Zeus, for once, didn't need to chase or transform. He simply joined the dance, though his first attempts were about as graceful as a cyclops in a pottery shop. The other gods tried and failed to hide their amusement as the mighty thunderer learned to move with something approaching elegance. More than a few random thunderstorms were actually the result of stepped-on toes and wounded pride. But Eurynome was a patient teacher. Under her guidance, Zeus began to understand the subtle language of movement. Together they spun through cloud layers, their dance creating weather patterns that would have modern meteorologists throwing their diplomas out the window in frustration. Where their feet touched the clouds, new constellations bloomed. When they twirled, Aurora Borealis sparked in their wake. The other gods watched in fascination as this unlikely partnership unfolded. Apollo would occasionally provide musical accompaniment, though he learned quickly to dodge the lightning bolts that came his way whenever he played something too fast for Zeus's still-developing dance skills. Even stern Athena, born from Zeus's splitting headache, was seen tapping her foot to the rhythm of their celestial waltz. Their movements became legend, sometimes gentle as morning mist, other times wild as a summer storm. They danced through seasons, through years, through the kind of time that only immortals can truly comprehend. The flowers in Demeter's gardens would sway in time with their steps, and the waves of Poseidon's oceans would create rhythmic patterns that matched their tempo. But like all of Zeus's romances, this one too would have its consequences, though these were more beautiful than most. From their union came the three Graces. Aglaia, whose very name meant splendour, carried her mother's radiance and her father's magnificence. Euphrosyne embodied mirth, her laughter containing notes of both her mother's flowing grace and her father's rolling thunder. And Thalia, good cheer personified, whose presence could brighten even Hades' gloomy realm, though her uncle remained steadfastly immune to family dinner invitations. The three Graces would go on to become essential parts of divine society, spreading beauty and joy throughout both the immortal and mortal realms. They danced like their mother and commanded attention like their father, though with considerably fewer lightning bolts involved. They became attendants to Aphrodite herself, which would later create some awkward family moments when Zeus's attention turned toward the love goddess's various companions. The Graces had inherited their mother's ability to move hearts and their father's power to influence minds, though they wielded both with far more subtlety than Zeus ever managed. They became known as the givers of all life's pleasures, from the grandest festivals to the smallest moments of daily joy. Even today, when people speak of moving with grace or facing life's challenges with good cheer, they're unknowingly invoking these divine sisters. But perhaps the most lasting consequence of Zeus's dance with Eurynome was the way it changed the god himself. For a time, he had learned to move with grace rather than simply commanding it, to create beauty rather than just demanding it. This lesson, unfortunately, wouldn't quite stick. Future conquests would prove that old habits die hard, especially for immortal gods. Like many endings in Greek mythology, their romance faded not with a bang, but with a gentle diminuendo, though thankfully with far less drama than Zeus's future breakups would entail. As the seasons turned, their celestial dance gradually slowed. Some say it was the natural cooling of passion, like storm clouds dispersing after rain. Others whisper that Eurynome saw the shifting winds of fate, recognized the gathering storms of Zeus's destined marriage to Hera on the horizon. Being an Oceanid, she understood better than most the nature of ebb and flow, of tides that come and go. Unlike many of Zeus's future paramours, Eurynome retained her dignity and position. She didn't flee to Earth's corners or suffer transformation into a tree or constellation, a fate that would become disappointingly common in Zeus's future romantic endeavours. Instead, she gracefully stepped back from their dance, her movements as elegant in retreat as they had been in courtship. The last night of their romance is still whispered about in certain immortal circles. They danced one final time among the clouds, their movements writing a farewell in the heavens. Witnesses say the aurora borealis that night was the most beautiful ever seen, and shooting stars fell in perfectly choreographed arcs. As dawn approached, Eurynome kissed Zeus once on each cheek, her touch light as sea spray, and simply walked away, her feet barely touching the clouds. Zeus for once didn't chase. Perhaps Metis's wisdom, still swirling in his skull, gave him enough sense to recognise the grace in this ending. Or maybe he was just distracted by his growing interest in a certain strong-willed goddess who would soon become Queen of Olympus. Eurynome returned to her duties among the Oceanids, occasionally visiting their daughters the Graces on Olympus. She maintained a dignified presence in divine society, neither avoiding Zeus nor seeking him out. The storms that had accompanied their passion settled into calm weather, and the clouds returned to their normal patterns. But sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and the clouds dance just so across the sky, those who know where to look can still see traces of their ancient choreography in the weather patterns. And if you listen carefully during summer storms, you might catch the echo of thunder that sounds almost like rhythm, almost like regret. After Eurynome danced away into the mists of memory, Zeus's eye was caught by perhaps his most dangerous conquest yet. Asteria, the starry-eyed daughter of Titans Coeus and Phoebe, sister to Leto. She was a goddess of nocturnal oracles and falling stars, and her very presence made the night sky shimmer with possibility. Imagine, if you will, a goddess who wore the night itself as her gown, her dark hair scattered with points of light that matched the constellations above. When she moved through Olympus's halls, starlight followed in her wake, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath, heavy with the weight of prophecy and possibility. Her voice carried the whispers of distant galaxies, and her eyes, well, looking into her eyes was like gazing into the depths of space itself. Beautiful, terrifying, and definitely not something you should do while trying to maintain your godly dignity. Now, you might think Zeus would have learned his lesson about pursuing goddesses connected to prophecy and wisdom after the whole matey in his head situation. But our thunderbolt-wielding friend had apparently developed a very selective memory when it came to romantic pursuits. Or perhaps he just had a type, powerful, mysterious women who really should have known better than to catch his eye. The first time Zeus spotted Asteria, she was interpreting the patterns of shooting stars near the edge of Olympus, her fingers tracing paths of light in the dark sky. The air crackled with divine energy, partly from her power over celestial phenomena, and partly because Zeus, in his infinite smoothness, had accidentally caused a minor lightning storm in his distraction. Nothing says, "hello there," quite like unexpected atmospheric disturbances. But Asteria was no easy conquest. Unlike her predecessors, she had witnessed Zeus's growing reputation firsthand. She'd seen the aftermath of his previous relationships, heard the whispers in the celestial courts, and probably had a few prophetic dreams about how this would all turn out. Being a goddess of prophecy can really put a damper on romantic surprises. When Zeus began his pursuit, Asteria proved more elusive than stardust. She would appear and disappear like her beloved shooting stars, leaving Zeus grasping at empty air and probably feeling rather foolish for a king of gods. The chase through Olympus became something of a divine spectacle. The mighty Zeus, lord of the sky, repeatedly outsmarted by a goddess who could literally fade into the night sky. Their chase became the stuff of legend, with Zeus growing more determined and increasingly less dignified, with each failed attempt to catch her. Asteria would appear at the edge of his vision like a shimmer of starlight, only to dissolve into the darkness when he drew near. The other gods began taking bets on how long this celestial game of cat and mouse would last, though they were wise enough to place these wagers well out of Zeus's thunderbolt range. The pursuit spread beyond Olympus, painting the night sky with their chase. When Zeus would surge forward on storm clouds, Asteria would transform the very stars into stepping stones, dancing across constellations with the grace of a meteor shower. Every night mortals would look up to see new patterns in the heavens, really just Zeus bumbling after a goddess who was always one star ahead of him. The air itself became charged with their game, his thunder rolling across the sky, her stellar magic leaving trails of stardust in her wake. Sometimes she would appear to him as a constellation, only to have the stars rearrange themselves into a rather unflattering portrait of his failed attempts to catch her. Even Helios, the sun god, was spotted trying to hide his snickering as he drove his chariot past particularly amusing celestial arrangements. But Zeus's persistence began to wear even on a goddess of Asteria's power. After all, how long can one keep dodging the king of gods? It was becoming clear that this game of cosmic hide-and-seek couldn't last forever. The prophecies in her dreams were growing darker, more insistent. She knew she had to make a choice, and it would need to be spectacular. One night, as Zeus nearly caught her near the edge of the world, he'd actually managed to grab a handful of stardust from her trailing chiton, Asteria made her decision. Rather than submit to Zeus's advances, she chose a transformation so dramatic it would literally reshape the Mediterranean. Drawing upon her deepest powers, Asteria transformed herself into a blazing quail and plunged from the heavens. As Zeus lunged for her, his fingers closed on nothing but falling stars. The goddess-turned bird plummeted toward the sea, her form blazing with such celestial fire that sailors would tell tales of it for generations. But even this wasn't her final form. As she struck the waves of Poseidon's domain, Asteria underwent one last transformation. She became an island, her body forming the rocky shores and mountains of what would become known as the island of Delos. The impact sent waves rolling across the Mediterranean, and where her starry essence touched the sea, the waters forever after glowed with phosphorescence. Zeus, for once, was left literally thunderstruck. It's not every day that your romantic pursuit ends with your intended turning herself into a piece of real estate. The island of Delos, floating free on the waves, became a sacred place. Though whether this was out of respect for Asteria's sacrifice or Zeus's wounded pride is still debated in certain mythological circles. This next tale sets the stage for basically every dramatic love triangle, jealous curse, and divine family feud that would follow. Picture Mount Olympus in its early days, still settling into its role as the home of the new divine order. The marble hadn't even had time to collect its first layer of ambrosia stains. Hera, daughter of Titans Cronus and Rhea, was everything a queen of heaven should be. Regal, powerful, and possessed of a wisdom that even Zeus in all his thunderous glory found intimidating. She walked through the halls of Olympus like sovereignty itself, each step precise and purposeful, her presence commanding enough to make minor gods scramble out of her path. Her beauty wasn't the soft kind that inspired gentle poetry. It was the kind that inspired empire building and possibly a few wars. The peacocks that would become her sacred birds followed in her wake, their tail feathers spread in permanent tribute to her magnificence. The air around her smelled of lilies and clean mountain air, with just a hint of ozone, as if the atmosphere itself was standing at attention. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of law and the promise of consequences. Even Zeus, who had recently finished arranging the cosmos to his liking, found himself straightening his chiton when she passed by. Now Zeus had already proven himself something of a romantic adventurer, and we're being diplomatic here. But Hera was different. She wasn't impressed by his lightning bolts or his "I overthrew the Titans" stories. When he tried to approach her directly, she gave him the kind of a look that could freeze Helios's chariot in mid-flight. So Zeus, being Zeus, decided that the best way to win over this magnificent and terrifying goddess was to trick her. Because apparently the king of gods had all the emotional intelligence of a love-struck cyclops. His brilliant plan? Zeus decided to transform himself into a distressed little cuckoo bird. Yes, the mighty king of gods, hurler of thunderbolts, defeater of titans, turned himself into a bedraggled bird. On a cold, stormy day, which he obviously engineered himself, he flew near Hera's favourite meadow, deliberately drenching his feathers and shivering pathetically. Now, what Zeus had counted on was Hera's little-known soft spot for creatures in distress. What he probably hadn't counted on was just how thoroughly this scheme would come back to bite him for, the rest of eternity. Picture this. Hera, walking through her meadow, her steps leaving blooming flowers in their wake, when suddenly she spots this miserable, soaking, wet bird. The peacocks trailing her looked positively offended at the shabby creature daring to attract their mistress's attention. But Hera, her heart softening at the sight, a rare occurrence that would become even rarer after this incident, gathered the shivering bird to her breast. The moment she held the cuckoo close to warm it, Zeus transformed back into his divine form. There he was, suddenly in Hera's arms, wearing what he probably thought was a charming smile, but more likely looked like a cat that had just caught a particularly juicy mouse. The nearby flowers wilted from sheer second-hand embarrassment. Hera's reaction was complex. The air crackled with divine energy as several emotions crossed her face. Surprise, outrage, and something that might have been reluctant admiration for the sheer audacity of it all. The peacock scattered, sensing imminent divine drama. But here's the thing about Hera. She wasn't just powerful, she was clever. Instead of immediately blasting Zeus with whatever the divine equivalent of a rejection letter was, she saw an opportunity. If the king of gods was willing to humble himself to this extent to win her attention, perhaps he could be managed. Their courtship that followed was the talk of Olympus. Zeus actually had to work for her affections, a novel experience for him. He brought her gifts, golden apples from the sunset gardens, clouds shaped like stories, constellations arranged just for her. He made promises. Oh, how he would come to regret those promises. He swore oaths of fidelity. The fates must have been crying with laughter at this point. Their wedding was the event of the celestial age, the kind of ceremony that made all other divine celebrations look like minor cloud gatherings. Every god, nymph, and immortal being received an invitation written in starlight naturally, though notably absent were any cuckoo birds. The celebration lasted for 300 years. Immortals have a different concept of weekend wedding. The Muses composed entirely new forms of music just for the occasion. The Horae decorated Olympus with flowers that had never bloomed before and haven't been seen since. Even the Fates took a break from their eternal weaving to attend, though they were spotted exchanging knowing looks during the vows. Hera was resplendent in a gown woven from moonbeams and dawn light, crowned with stars that would later become the constellation Corona Borealis. Zeus actually managed to keep his eyes from wandering for the entire ceremony, a personal record that would, unfortunately, not last much longer than the honeymoon. Their wedding gift from Gaia herself was a tree bearing golden apples guarded by the Hesperides. The other gods brought presents that would become legendary. Poseidon created new seas for them to rule over. Demeter made flowers bloom in impossible places, and Hephaestus forged them thrones that made all other divine seats look like common clouds. The early days of their marriage were, well, as close to perfect as anything involving Zeus could be. Olympus thrived under their joint rule. Hera established herself as a true queen of heaven, her authority equal to Zeus's own. When they sat together on their thrones, even the titans in their prison had to admit the new regime looked pretty impressive. But here's where things started to get interesting. Read complicated. See, Hera wasn't just Zeus's wife. She became the goddess of marriage itself. She took her divine portfolio seriously, believing that sacred unions should be, actually sacred. She probably should have discussed this perspective with Zeus before the wedding. The first few centuries were relatively peaceful. Zeus was attentive, more or less faithful, and actually consulted Hera on important cosmic decisions. The other gods started to think maybe, just maybe, the king of gods had finally settled down. And then Zeus started noticing nymphs again, and mortal princesses, and basically anything that moved and caught his eye. Remember that record-breaking attention span from the wedding? It finally ran out. There was Zeus, king of the gods, sitting on his throne one particularly boring afternoon. The nectar was flowing, the ambrosia was perfectly aged, his marriage to Hera was stable, and everything was running smoothly. Perhaps that was the problem. Zeus, being a primal force of nature, didn't do well with smooth or stable. It was like expecting a hurricane to practice meditation. Enter Io, a priestess of Hera, because Zeus apparently had a gift for choosing the worst possible targets for his affections. She was a river nymph of extraordinary beauty, with flowing hair the colour of sun-dappled streams and movements as fluid as her father's waters. But it wasn't just her beauty that caught Zeus's eye. It was the way she carried herself while performing Hera's rites. The dedication and grace that reminded him of his wife's own dignity. Now, this is where we should probably discuss Zeus's impulse control issues. Imagine having the power to command the sky itself, to hurl thunderbolts that could shake the earth, to basically do whatever you want whenever you want, for eons. That kind of absolute power doesn't exactly breed self-restraint. Add to that the restless nature of storms and the unpredictability of lightning, all bound up in an immortal being who had never heard the word no, and made a habit of transforming anyone who tried to say it. The air around Io's temple began to grow thick with storm clouds. Zeus would watch her perform her duties, hidden in mists of his own creation, probably telling himself he was just appreciating her devotion to Hera, right? Because nothing says I respect my wife quite like lurking invisibly around her temples, eyeing her priestesses. But Zeus found himself drawn back day after day, watching as Io tended the sacred fires and sang hymns to Hera. The thunder god, who could command the attention of any deity on Olympus, found himself holding his breath when she walked past his hiding spot. His lightning, usually under his strict control, would occasionally flicker unbidden when she smiled. Zeus, master of subtlety that he was, began his pursuit by sending dreams to Io. Not just any dreams. We're talking full production numbers featuring clouds parting dramatically, divine light streaming down, and his voice booming through her subconscious like celestial surround sound. Every night, Io would dream of Zeus telling her to meet him in the meadows beyond Hera's temple, because nothing says discreet affair quite like literally announcing your intentions through divine dream broadcasts. During the day, he tried a more atmospheric approach. Whenever Io would walk through the temple gardens, sudden mysterious breezes would ruffle her hair. Random sunbeams would spotlight her steps. Flowers would spontaneously bloom in her path. The other priestesses started giving her odd looks, probably wondering why nature itself seemed to be working overtime as her personal special effects team. Finally, Zeus decided to make his move. One particularly beautiful afternoon, as Io was gathering flowers for Hera's altar, the irony was completely lost on Zeus. He approached her in a form he thought would be less intimidating than his full divine glory. He surrounded her in a cloud of golden mist, his voice gentle as summer thunder. Now Io wasn't naive. She knew exactly who this mysteriously convenient cloud had to be, and she was also painfully aware of whose temple she was standing in. She tried to refuse, quite sensibly pointing out that perhaps pursuing a priestess of Hera in Hera's own sacred grounds wasn't the best idea anyone had ever had. But Zeus, being Zeus persisted. He pulled out all the stops, promises of divine favour, declarations of undying love. Ha! And the kind of sweet talk that only an immortal being with centuries of practice could manage. The air around them filled with the scent of ambrosia. Soft music seemed to play from nowhere, and distant thunder provided romantic background ambience. Poor Io found herself torn between her vows to Hera and the increasingly insistent attention of the king of gods himself. It's worth noting that saying no to Zeus wasn't just difficult, it could be downright dangerous. Not that he would deliberately harm her, but his track record with rejected advances tended to involve a lot of creative transformations. Picture this: a beautiful meadow near Hera's temple, flowers blooming out of season, subtle, Zeus, really subtle, and golden sunlight that somehow managed to shine through storm clouds. Because Zeus was apparently trying to create the world's most obvious romantic atmosphere. The air itself hummed with divine energy as Zeus and Io met in secret, their liaisons hidden beneath clouds that were suspiciously localized and oddly persistent. But here's the thing about trying to hide from the Queen of Heaven. It's about as effective as trying to sneak sunrise past Helios. Hera wasn't just Zeus's wife. She was a powerful goddess in her own right, and she had noticed some rather unusual weather patterns around her temple lately. Very unusual. Like random clouds that giggle, unusual. One day, Hera was looking down from Olympus and noticed something odd. A perfect circle of storm clouds hovering over one of her sacred meadows on an otherwise clear day. Now, Hera had been around long enough to recognise her husband's idea of a disguise. She had also developed a particular sense for detecting Zeus's wandering eye. Some might call it paranoia, but after a few centuries of marriage to Zeus, paranoia was just good sense. As Hera approached the suspicious cloud formation, suddenly the entire landscape changed. Where Io had stood moments before, there was now a beautiful white heifer, the most gorgeous cow anyone had ever seen, with the eyes that seemed unusually human and filled with terror. Zeus, standing nearby in his divine form, was trying to look innocent, an expression he had never quite mastered. "What a lovely cow," Hera said, in the kind of voice that made lesser gods seek cover. "Such an unusual creature to find in my sacred meadow." Zeus, who had transformed Io into a cow in a panic when he sensed Hera approaching, was now stuck between a rock and a hard place, or more accurately between his furious wife and his transformed lover. Hera, with a smile that would have made Medusa nervous, did something brilliantly cruel. She asked Zeus for the cow as a gift. After all, such a beautiful heifer clearly belonged in the Queen of Heaven's sacred herd. Zeus found himself in the awkward position of either admitting the cow was actually his transformed lover, not recommended, or giving Io to Hera, potentially worse. Zeus, displaying all the backbone of a rain cloud, handed Io over. The look in Io's bovine eyes at that moment probably made him feel about as tall as one of his own thunderbolts. But Hera was just getting started. She assigned Argus Panoptes to guard Io, and when we say guard, we mean never take your eyes off her, not even for a second guard. This was particularly effective because Argus had 100 eyes, and only a few of them slept at a time. Try escaping from that while dealing with 4 hooves you never had before. Poor Io spent her days grazing in Hera's meadow, trying to maintain some dignity while eating grass and swatting flies with her new tail. Her father, the river god Inachus, didn't even recognise her when she tried to communicate by drawing letters in the dirt with her hoof. Imagine trying to maintain your priestess poise while your main method of communication is bovine charades. Zeus, watching from Olympus, finally felt guilty enough to act. He sent Hermes to deal with Argus, because apparently he couldn't be bothered to clean up his own mess. Hermes, ever resourceful, arrived disguised as a shepherd and proceeded to bore Argus to sleep by telling the world's longest story while playing soporific tunes on his pipes. Even the few eyes that usually stayed awake couldn't resist Hermes's divine lullaby. But just when Io thought her troubles were over, Argus having been permanently put to sleep by Hermes, Hera launched phase 2 of her revenge. She sent a gadfly, not just any gadfly mind you, but a divinely annoying one, to torment Io. This industrious insect chased her across the known world, giving her exactly 0 moments of peace. Ah, yes, because Hera was just getting warmed up. The Io incident taught her 2 important things. 1, that Zeus wasn't going to change his wandering ways, and 2, that she needed to get more creative with her revenge. What followed was essentially a divine establishment of the don't get mad, get even principle. Hera developed a comprehensive system for dealing with Zeus's affairs. She had informants everywhere, nymphs, minor gods, even the winds themselves would whisper gossip to her. She became so good at catching Zeus in the act that he started getting paranoid about clouds that looked too much like peacock feathers. But her real masterpiece was her graduated scale of vengeance. For minor flirtations, she might just cause some bad weather or spoil some ambrosia. But for serious affairs, she got creative. And she almost never targeted Zeus directly. She wasn't born yesterday, after all. No, she focused on his lovers and offspring, which had the dual benefit of punishing the other woman and making Zeus feel guilty. Take Semele, for instance. When Hera learned about Zeus's interest in this particular mortal princess, she didn't storm in with thunderbolts blazing. Instead, she disguised herself as Semele's old nurse, complete with a perfectly crafted grandmotherly concern, and planted a seed of doubt in the girl's mind. If he's really Zeus, she suggested, why won't he show himself in his true divine form? Any real god would prove himself to his lover. It was brilliant, really. Hera knew that no mortal could survive seeing a god's true form. She also knew that Zeus had sworn by the river Styx to grant Semele anything she asked for. When Semele demanded to see Zeus in all his glory, he had to comply, effectively being forced to destroy his own lover. So do you recall Asteria's dramatic island transformation? Well, Zeus found himself drawn to her sister Leto. Whether this was fate, coincidence, or just Zeus having a very specific type. Titan daughters with connections to night and prophecy. The results would shake Olympus to its foundations. Leto possessed a different kind of beauty from her starry sister. Where Asteria had been all celestial fire and shooting stars, Leto embodied the gentle darkness before dawn. Her presence brought the soft silence of midnight, the kind that wraps around you like a velvet cloak. Her hair was the colour of ravens' wings, and her eyes held the quiet wisdom of ancient night. She moved through Olympus like a shadow of grace, her footsteps silent as owls' wings. The air around her carried the scent of night-blooming flowers and sacred groves, places where prophecies whispered through leaves. Even the ever-present lights of Olympus seemed to dim respectfully in her presence, creating pools of gentle shadow wherever she walked. But here's where things get complicated, as if they weren't already. By this time, Zeus was of course married to Hera. Yes, you read that correctly. The king of gods, fresh from turning one sister into an island, decided the perfect time to pursue the other sister was right after getting married. Divine marriage counsellors would have had a field day with this one if they'd existed and weren't terrified of being turned into various woodland creatures for their insights. Despite her quiet nature, or perhaps because of it, Leto captured Zeus's attention more completely than any since Metis. Their initial encounters were subtle, meaningful glances across the great hall of Olympus, conversations that seemed innocent but carried depths like the night sky itself. Zeus actually tried discretion for once, though calling anything Zeus did discreet is rather like calling a cyclops subtle. The air between them crackled with unspoken possibility. When they did speak, their conversations were like the meeting of storm and night, his thunder softening to match her quiet wisdom, her darkness occasionally illuminated by flashes of wit that reminded him of lightning. Even the muses found themselves inspired by the tension, though they wisely kept their new compositions to themselves. Their affair, when it finally bloomed, was different from Zeus's usual passionate storms. It was quiet, like starlight sliding across still waters. They met in the spaces between shadow and light, in moments stolen from the watchful eyes of Olympus. For once, Zeus didn't announce his conquest with dramatic weather patterns. The only sign of their meetings might be an unusually gentle rain, or the way shadows seem to dance more gracefully in the moonlight. But of course, nothing escapes Hera's notice forever. The first hint she had of the affair was subtle. The way the night air seemed to hold its breath when both Zeus and Leto were present at divine gatherings. The manner in which shadows curved protectively around the Titan goddess. The suspicious lack of Zeus's usual thunderous snoring during certain nights. When Leto's pregnancy became known, it sparked one of the most dramatic episodes in divine history. Hera, who'd been dealing with Zeus's infidelities for centuries by this point, outdid herself with her revenge. She didn't just target Leto, she issued a decree that no land on Earth, floating or fixed, could offer shelter to Leto when it came time for her to give birth. Imagine being 9 months pregnant with divine twins, because of course Zeus couldn't just stick to one child, and literally having nowhere on Earth to give birth. Every time Leto approached a shoreline or mountain, the land itself would shrink away, compelled by Hera's curse. Islands would sink beneath the waves at her approach. Forests would uproot themselves and flee. To add insult to injury, Hera sent Python, a monstrous serpent, to pursue the pregnant goddess across the earth. Picture a heavily pregnant Titan goddess, carrying the future god of light and goddess of the hunt, running from a giant snake while trying to find any patch of earth that would hold still long enough for her to catch her breath. In the end, it was Asteria's final act that provided salvation. Remember that floating island she'd transformed herself into? Delos, unanchored and drifting on the waves, found a loophole in Hera's curse. Technically, as a floating island, it wasn't really land at all, more of a wandering piece of divine real estate. When Leto arrived at Delos, exhausted and in labour, the island actually stopped its eternal drifting to welcome her. The moment Leto's feet touched the shore, flowers bloomed in her footsteps. The first growth the barren island had seen since Asteria's transformation. The air filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, as if the darkness itself was trying to comfort her. But giving birth to divine twins isn't exactly a simple affair. Leto's labour lasted 9 days and 9 nights, because apparently even childbirth has to be epic in divine circles. The pain of her contractions caused waves to crash against Delos's shores, and her cries of anguish echoed across the Aegean, sending seabirds wheeling in sympathetic distress. All the goddesses, except Hera of course, wanted to help, but Hera had another trick up her divine sleeve. She was keeping Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, up on Olympus. Without the childbirth goddess's presence, Leto remained in eternal labour, unable to deliver her divine burden. It was like being stuck in the world's longest and most uncomfortable divine waiting room. Finally, the other goddesses came up with a plan. They offered Eileithyia a 9-yard-long necklace strung with golden threads, because divine brides need to be appropriately sparkly. The childbirth goddess, perhaps tired of Hera's pettiness, or maybe just really into celestial jewellery, slipped away from Olympus. The moment Eileithyia set foot on Delos, everything changed. Artemis was born first, and in a twist that would make any older sibling proud, she immediately helped her mother deliver Apollo. Yes, the goddess of childbirth arrived just in time to watch a newborn goddess assist in her own twin brother's delivery. Even by divine standards, this was showing off. Interestingly, Leto is one of the few of Zeus's lovers who maintained a position of respect and dignity after their affair. Unlike many others who were transformed, cursed, or hidden away, Leto remained a powerful and honoured goddess, largely due to her role as the mother of Apollo and Artemis. Zeus actually showed her unusual respect after the birth of the twins. While he didn't continue their romance, Zeus wasn't exactly known for his long-term commitment skills. He ensured that Leto and her children were given proper divine honours. He even made Apollo and Artemis part of the Olympian Council, a privilege not granted to most of his other demigod offspring. Leto would occasionally appear at Olympus, moving through the halls with the same quiet grace as before, but now with an added air of maternal pride. The shadows still dimmed respectfully in her presence, but they were often pierced by the golden light of Apollo or the silver gleam of Artemis's bow. Her children's power and prominence gave her a kind of immunity from Hera's usual vengeance. There's a telling moment recorded in myth where Niobe, a mortal queen, boasted that she was better than Leto because she had more children. Leto didn't even have to respond. Apollo and Artemis took care of that insult themselves, demonstrating that it's not the quantity of children that matters, but the quality, especially when said quality includes divine archery skills. Zeus and Leto maintained a cordial relationship, marked by mutual respect rather than passion. They would interact at divine councils and celebrations, their former romance transformed into something more diplomatic. Some say you could still see a softening in Zeus's expression when Leto entered a room, a gentle rumble of thunder that spoke more of fond memories than storm and fury. The thing about Zeus and his perpetual affairs is rather complex. Imagine being a force of nature itself, bound into a more or less humanoid form. Weather doesn't do faithful, storms don't understand monogamy, and lightning, by its very nature, is capricious. Zeus was passion and power personified, with all the impulse control of a tornado at a wind chime convention. After Leto, Zeus turned his wandering eye toward Maia, one of the Pleiades sisters. The Pleiades were mountain nymphs, daughters of Atlas. Yes, the same Atlas who held up the sky. Zeus certainly had a knack for complicated family dynamics. Maia lived in a beautiful cave on Mount Cylon, and she was known for being the shyest and most beautiful of her sisters. Picture a goddess who embodied the gentle, nurturing aspects of Earth itself. While her sisters danced among the stars, Maia preferred the quiet solitude of her cave, surrounded by stalactites that sparkled like captured starlight. The air around her smelled of rich soil after rain and wild mountain herbs. Her voice echoed with the soft whisper of underground springs, and her movements had the fluid grace of shadow and light playing across cave walls. Now you might think Zeus would have learned subtlety by this point. You'd be wrong, but at least this time he tried a slightly different approach. He waited for Hera to fall asleep before sneaking off to Maia's cave, because apparently the king of gods' solution to marital discord was essentially, if my wife's asleep, it doesn't count. The cave itself seemed to conspire with their meetings, its shadows deepening to hide them, its crystals dimming their usual sparkle. Their encounters were always at night, always secret, with Zeus returning to Olympus before Hera awoke. He was like a teenager sneaking out after curfew, if said teenager could control weather patterns and transform into various animals. Their nighttime meetings continued, each one a careful dance of timing and secrecy. Zeus would wait until Hera's breathing fell into the deep rhythm of sleep, then transform himself into a gentle rain to slip down to Maia's cave unnoticed. For once, he actually managed to keep things quiet. No random lightning storms, no suspicious cloud formations, no dramatic thunderclaps giving away his position. Maia's cave became a sanctuary of sorts, a place where Zeus could temporarily shed the weight of divine kingship. With her, he didn't have to be the thundering ruler of Olympus. He could just be himself, whatever that meant for a god who spent most of his time either hurling thunderbolts or thinking up new shapes to transform into. But of course, these things have consequences. When Maia became pregnant, she withdrew even further into her cave, wrapping herself in shadows and silence. The crystals in her cave glowed with a subtle blue light, as if reflecting the divine child growing within her. The mountain itself seemed to cradle her, its rocks shifting to make her more comfortable. Now here's where things get interesting. Their son, Hermes, decided he didn't want to waste time with a conventional childhood. Within hours of his birth, while Maia was taking a well-deserved nap, the divine infant got up, fashioned a lyre from a tortoise shell, invented first musical instrument, stole Apollo's sacred cattle, and created the first barbecue, all before breakfast. talk about an overachiever. When Zeus found out about his newest son's escapades, he couldn't decide whether to be angry or impressed. Here was a child after his own heart, a divine troublemaker with a gift for creative problem-solving and selective interpretation of rules. The fact that baby Hermes had managed to prank Apollo, one of Zeus's most dignified children, probably earned him some bonus points with Dad. Maia, meanwhile, had to deal with Apollo storming into her peaceful cave, demanding to know where his cattle were, only to find what appeared to be an innocent baby in a cradle. An innocent baby who was failing miserably at hiding his smirk. After Hermes' birth, Zeus and Maia's relationship shifted into something more distant but respectful. Unlike some of his other lovers who faced tragic ends or transformations, Maia was allowed to continue her peaceful existence in her cave, largely protected from Hera's wrath by both her isolation and her son's growing influence. Zeus would occasionally visit, though not as a lover anymore, mostly to check on young Hermes or to seek the kind of quiet refuge that only Maia's cave could provide. There was something about her presence, her connection to the deep places of the earth, that offered a different kind of peace than the bright halls of Olympus. Maia became known as a sort of divine nurse and caretaker. In fact, when Hera rejected her own son Hephaestus and threw him from Olympus, family dynamics were complicated up there, it was Maia who helped tend to him. There's something rather poetic about Zeus's former lover caring for his wife's rejected child. She maintained her dignity and position as one of the Pleiades, though she was now set apart from her sisters by her experience with Zeus and her remarkable son. On clear nights, if you look at the Pleiades cluster, you might notice that one star seems a bit more withdrawn than the others. That's Maia, still keeping to herself after all these centuries. The really interesting thing about Maia's story is how it represents a shift in Zeus's pattern. She was one of the few lovers who managed to remain in the divine sphere without tragedy, transformation, or terrible vengeance from Hera. Perhaps it was her natural discretion, or maybe Zeus was finally learning to handle these situations with a bit more delicacy. Hopefully you have drifted off to sleep by now. It would appear that Zeus's conquests are so vast we need a future part 2 to continue this story.